The PS4 launch for Maximum Football 2020 did not go smoothly. The version of the game that was downloadable from the PSN on September 25th was so buggy as to be borderline unplayable. Teams were duplicated in the customization and team select menus. None of the playbooks included any running plays whatsoever. The game's performance was choppy and it was very unstable, and there were numerous other bugs. To Canuck Play's credit, they worked overnight to get a patch released to Sony the following day. This Day 2 patch fixed many of the aforementioned issues, but it did introduce some others. Depth charts became messed up, and numberless, nameless players were being subbed into my Dynasty games. A second patch came out a week after launch, which addressed the issues introduced by the Day 2 patch. I don't know how Maximum Football 2020 made it through Sony's certification process in this state, but yet Sony held up the release of Axis Football for the past 2 years. At least Axis Football worked. In any case, I want to give credit to Canuck Play for their quick response and turnaround in getting the game into a playable state. Unfortunately, even after the 2 patches, Maximum Football 2020 is still not where I'd like it to be. Not by a long shot. The game is still riddled with bugs, rules inaccuracies, balance issues, exploits, and general instability. I don't think I've seen as many hard crashes on a PS4 game as I've seen with Maximum Football 2020. I've seen a lot of problems with Maximum Football 2020, and I want to get this early impressions video out as soon as possible in the hopes that at least some of these major issues and bugs can be fixed in patches. There will be plenty of time in the coming weeks and months for me to make a full critique and to talk about the game's positives. Last year, I did not publish my critiques until December, January, and February. Far too late for Canuck Play to make meaningful fixes based on any feedback I offered. Hopefully, releasing this video in October will be early enough for Canuck Play, assuming that they see this video or are otherwise aware of the issues, to actually act on the feedback in an October or November patch. Also, just for clarity's sake, I'm playing the PlayStation 4 version of the game, which, as I said at the top of the video, launched in a poor state. Stupid trophies still won't sync with the server either. I'm not sure if this is something Canuck needs to fix, or if I somehow broke the trophies when I deleted my save data in order to install the Day 2 patch. Anyway, perhaps the PS4 version is an inferior port. If you're playing on the Xbox and you aren't having the following issues, then cool, good for you. I don't know how the Xbox version compares, so if you're playing the Xbox, feel free to let me know if these bugs are present in that version of the game, in the comments below. And also, just to be clear, I'm not making this video for the purposes of shitting all over Maximum Football 20 or Canuck Play. As I've said in the past, I want both Maximum and Axis to do well, to earn money, and to see steady improvement year after year, and eventually offer a robust simulation football title that can compete on an even footing against Madden. I'm not a Madden fanboy either, which you'll know if you've watched any of my past video commentaries, including my recent How Madden Fails to Simulate Football commentary series. I will have a full review of Maximum Football 2020 on my blog soon, and more videos will follow. I promise I will have more positive things to say in that follow-up content. If you did watch my How Madden Fails to Simulate Football video, or at least the first episode, or you read the associated blog, then you know I'm a stickler for the pacing of the game clock in football video games. Madden fails in this regard by being designed for short, casual games, despite having an accelerated clock feature that allows 15-minute quarter games to be played well within a reasonable time frame. Maximum Football 2020, on the other hand, does default to 15-minute quarters and even locks some of its gameplay trophies and achievements behind the 15-minute quarter setting. 15-minute quarters is clearly how the designers intend for the game to be played. But Maximum Football 2020 does not provide an accelerated clock like Madden does or like Axis does in order to speed up the game. There is a very slight runoff of a few seconds when you're going into the play calling screen, but it's not very significant. CPU teams are still breaking the huddle with 25 seconds left. This is on a 30-second play clock, which puts them at no risk of a delay of game or of needing to ever call a timeout to avoid a delay of game penalty. This causes teams to run more plays, which inflates total scores and statistics, and it also makes the game just plain take too damn long to play as the games drag on in the third and fourth quarters. The problems of game pacing are exacerbated by a number of bugs and rules errors associated with the clock. Some of these have been in the game for at least a year or two, so I'm very disappointed to see that they haven't been fixed or addressed yet. The play clock, for instance, stops after every play in the Canadian rules. Pretty sure that is not in the Canadian rulebook. In college football games, the game clock stops after first downs, which is correct, and then resumes when the teams break the huddle, which is not correct. In actual college football, the game clock does stop after first downs, but only long enough for the officials to spot the ball between plays. If the offense isn't running a no huddle, the game clock will resume while they are in the huddle. Maximum Football doesn't do this because they don't have animations of officials running out and picking up the ball and respotting it, even though football video games on the PlayStation 1 had those animations. So their compromise was to just restart the game clock after you break the huddle. It's an okay compromise, but it's not ideal. On the other end of the spectrum, Maximum Football 2020 does allow the game clock to continue running if a punt goes out of bounds, despite the change in possession. In real football, any change of possession, for any reason, always stops the game clock, or at least I'm not aware of any version of football that allows the game clock to run after a change of possession. So, the game rules don't know how to manage the clock, but neither do the CPU teams. In past years, the CPU managed the clock just fine, but in 2020, they apparently forgot how to run the 4-minute drill. CPU teams do not make any effort to call timeouts to preserve time when trailing late in the game or in the second quarter. They know to run out the clock when leading, but they do not know how to run a hurry-up offense of any kind. I've seen the CPU down by 4 inside of 3 minutes not even bother to use its timeouts on defense to try to force me to punt so that it can mount a game-winning drive. They just let me run out the clock. Worse yet, I've also seen the CPU down by 1 or 2 in the final minutes get into or near field goal range as the last seconds tick away, still with all 3 timeouts in their pocket. But they don't call the timeout, the clock expires, and they lose. Maximum Football does not implement no huddles, hurry-up offense, or even onside kicks at all, so the odds are already stacked against any fourth quarter comebacks, but the CPU refusing to use its timeouts that it has just makes the game painfully uncompetitive. The need for the CPU to call its timeouts when appropriate is made even more important by yet another bug that causes the play clock to reset after the human-controlled team breaks the huddle while the game clock is still running. This can be exploited to double the amount of game clock that you can run off between plays, potentially allowing the human player to run as much as 3 or 4 minutes of game clock without needing to gain a single yard or make a single first down. And speaking of onside kicks, or the lack thereof, special teams is another significant problem area in Maximum Football. Perhaps the single most exploitative rules failing in the game is that unfielded punts are treated as live balls. It's easy to angle a punt low and away from the returner, especially since the returners like to stand offset to one side of the field. If the ball stays in bounds and out of the end zone, someone from the punting team can easily recover it for a first down. You'll probably start the drive in or near field goal range to boot. The user has no control over the returner while the ball is in the air, so if it would bounce inside the 10-yard line, you can't move the returner away to let the ball bounce into the end zone for a touchback. You have to risk the returner trying to field the ball and potentially whiffing it or fumbling it and resulting in a turnover. Actually, you know what? I stand corrected. There is an even more exploitable rules glitch. and that is that the game does not enforce offsides penalties on special teams plays. Blocking punts and field goals in 2019's game seemed impossible, but it's trivially easy in 2020 because you can literally run through the offensive line and stand behind the long snapper to disrupt the snap or the kick. Offense and defensive play are much better than the special teams play, but they still have a few problems of their own. It might just be that I'm playing with a cupcake dynasty team with a low-rated QB and receivers, but I cannot complete a pass to a wide receiver to save my life. I can complete passes to tight ends and running backs just fine, but almost every throw to a receiver is either overthrown by just a few inches or it just bounces off the receiver's hands. This is happening regardless of whether I throw bullet passes or touch passes. I know there were problems with bullet passes when the game first launched, but those were supposedly fixed in one of the 2 patches. I've tried adjusting the catch modifier setting with no luck. My receivers just do not want to catch passes. And it's resulting in my quarterback having like a 33 to 50% completion percentage in every game. It's bad. On the defensive side of the ball, the biggest problem that I've seen is that sometimes my user-controlled defender gets locked into running in a specific direction, and I can't change his direction for the life of me. When this happens, he often runs himself out of the play or out of his coverage assignment, and sometimes gives up a big play in so doing. We all know that the meat of this game is in its College Dynasty mode, and thankfully that mode has so far been fairly stable for me in its sophomore year. I do have a few complaints though. My biggest complaint is the same complaint that I had last year, which is that there aren't any recruiting pitches that benefit smaller schools. There's no pitches for early playing time or play calling tendencies or for upset victories against quality opponents or anything like that. Those sorts of pitches could give smaller schools an edge up in recruiting against bigger schools, which have all of the other recruiting pitches going in their favor. So if early playing time is really important to a player, then hey, maybe he goes to a school in this game's equivalent of the Mountain West Conference instead of going to the Pac-12, where, they have a loaded depth chart. The best pitch available to such schools is usually the proximity to home pitch. Last year, this pitch had all sorts of problems and was completely broken. And unfortunately, at launch of this year's game, it was also bugged such that every player had the same rating for proximity as the first player who you attempted to recruit in any given play session. So all I had to do was start out my recruiting week by calling a player from Nevada, and then every other prospect that I talked to would also have an elite ranking for that pitch. This bug was also supposedly fixed in a patch, and I guess it's working as intended now. Unfortunately, the rating is always either elite if you're in the same state as the prospect, or it's low if the prospect is in any other state. Adjacent states do not get any higher proximity ratings for some reason. I play my dynasty as a school in Las Vegas, so the few Nevada prospects have elite proximity. I would expect recruits from adjacent states like California, Arizona, and Utah to also have good or very good ratings, and considering that Hawaiians often refer to Vegas as the ninth island, I would also expect Hawaii to have an average or good proximity rating or better with Las Vegas. Nope. Every state outside of Nevada is low. Canuck claimed in pre-release promotional materials that every team in this dynasty mode would have a unique playbook and play calling tendencies. This seems to be technically true. Every team does seem to have its own playbook. But every playbook is the same. It's the same formations and the same plays in every team's playbook, unless you go to the trouble of manually modifying a given team's playbook in the fancy pants new play designer feature that was introduced in this year's game. So even if the team's play calling is slightly different, the fact that they're all calling plays from the same playbooks still means that they don't feel as differentiated from each other as they should. especially considering how run-happy the QBs are for every school in this game. Those run-happy QBs, by the way, really love to scramble right into my pass rushers, which has wildly inflated my sack statistics. Alright, well, that's all I've got for now. Like I said, I just wanted to get a quick video out there airing my grievances that I have with the game in the hopes that Canuck will be able to fix at least some of it in the coming weeks or months. I'll probably do a full critique later in the year, and maybe also another comparison video against Axis football. Last year, I put up a poll on my Patreon page asking my patrons what topic they would like to see me discuss relating to the indie football games. The winner, with a whopping one single vote, was a breakdown of Maximum and Axis's football knowledge. So I intend to do a video on that topic after the release of Axis 2020, which is probably already out on Steam and maybe also on Xbox by the time you're watching this. My channel and Patreon page are still very young and very small, and so your support can make a huge difference. I do hope that you'll consider supporting me on Patreon. I do put up polls for what content to produce next, so making a contribution will allow you to help shape the content I create and the future of this channel. It may also help improve these very games that I talk about. Canuck Play and Axis are both small, independent studios, and they definitely listen to community feedback. I've already had correspondences with a developer at Axis Games regarding some of my feedback on Axis 19. He even asked me to help playtest some patches for the Steam version that were designed to fix some of the bugs that I'd reported, along with some other problems that other users in the community had reported. The Axis team has implemented several fixes and new features that I specifically suggested via my video critiques and on their Discord channel. So even if you don't want to support my content creation, I still hope that you'll consider supporting Canuck and or Axis on their respective Patreon pages, and of course that you'll consider buying the games. You can also join their Discord groups and make your voice heard. Together, we can make these games better, and in the case of Axis, at least, I think we already have.